All right. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate the time today, and welcome to Nutanix at 9 with eGroup. Looking forward to kind of taking you through the first session on this series. And again, thanks for submitting the questions ahead of time and joining us today. So before we get started, just wanted to go through real quick and lay out the agenda for today. So you should be able to see that pop up there on the screen. What we want to do is obviously do a quick introduction, kind of, who are these people talking to you today, myself and Mike Dent. We're going to do a quick recap on just some new features that have been released with the Nutanix platform. I know between the attendees today, we've got a few people that have been using Nutanix for quite some time, but also some people that are maybe interested in Nutanix. So with this, we're always going to want to make sure we're touching on some of the newest updates and keeping you current with those. After that, we're actually going to dive into the questions and comments that we've either had submitted for today's session, as well as a few that we've had just in general with some of our customers and conversations here at eGroup. So really, that's going to be the bulk of today, walking through the questions and the answers relevant to you. And again, appreciate that being sent out. And then finally, just kind of the outro, right? What can you do if you find something helpful? How can we continue to help with the conversation? We'll make sure we kind of wrap with some details on that and how we can make the most of your Nutanix evaluation here. So as far as kind of some quick introductions here, myself, I made the PowerPoint and obviously forgot my own slide, but I'm kind of kicking things off today. My name's Dan Drude. I am one of the account executives with eGroup. I've been here for a little over a year, been in the IT space for about 8 years, and I'm based out of Northern Virginia. So if you're in the DC area, Virginia area, I'd be your contact here at eGroup, but again, appreciate you hopping on. From a Nutanix perspective, I have spent maybe 4 to 5 years focused on Nutanix. I hold their NCSX platform, which is a fancy sales certification where I was able to click a few things in the demo. So fairly confident on that end. But on the other side of the house, wanted to introduce you to Mike Dent from our side. He's got quite the extensive Nutanix resume. In addition to everything else he's done here at eGroup. But Mike's been with eGroup for about 8 years. He comes from really a senior architecture and kind of leadership role over numerous larger companies before joining eGroup, and has really helped us drive our Nutanix business for, I don't know, Mike, what, the past 5, 6, 7 years? I know you've been
our first Nutanix installation. I think it's six years ago in June. I think it'll be
awesome. So yeah, it's been a long story with the eGroup team, and I know that this is something that might be new to those of you in attendance today. So we're really looking forward to use this as a forum to kind of share what we know and help you better understand everything that's out there. So with that being said, kind of move along. Just a quick slide on eGroup. For those of you that are here, you probably know who we are. You did your research. You're not just showing up to some random webinar, knowing that there's probably a million invites to webinars going out each day. But for those that need the background, right, we've been around for about 20 years. We are headquartered out of Charleston, South Carolina. That was a major perk of my part of the job back when we could travel, but been working from home for about the past year with COVID. However, we've really been able to deliver success all over those 20 years throughout different scenarios, and we do that with our narrow focus and really our intense focus on customer satisfaction. So I think you'll see a lot of that today in kind of the stories that we share around Nutanix and why we've chosen this platform as kind of our go-to for infrastructure, really making sure that we can kind of communicate that value to you today. And so with that being said, before we kind of jump in to the Nutanix news, just a quick reminder, if you're starting to think of things around Nutanix, or even if you have questions on eGroup, we want this to be a participatory type of engagement. So feel free to throw anything that you might have in the chat box, the Q&A box. As far as kind of the quick Nutanix news, for those of you that might be already using the platform, Nutanix Flow, which is a security product that we'll be diving on in our next session, they've now released Flow Security Central, which introduces a lot more automation into basically how you look into network operations and also just the general state of security across your Nutanix clusters. So that's a big announcement there as they evolve that product. For those unaware, that kind of compares to like a VMware NSX, or if you've been researching microsegmentation, Flow falls into that realm. And like I said, we'll be talking on that in more detail at our next session. For those of you on Nutanix that have been used to Prism Pro and Prism Starter, Prism Ultimate has now been released, and it adds a lot of, higher level visibility and automation features around your applications. as well as more kind of departmental features where you can do budgeting and chargebacks across different groups that may be accessing IT. So that's something worth exploring as well if you are taking a look at Nutanix and want to get a feel for different licensing types. Prism, I know, has 2 categories historically, but making sure that you take a look at Ultimate and see if that provides any value. I think that's certainly newsworthy.
Yeah, and Dan, I want to add one thing there real quick, just to kind of, some of the naming connotation kind of confuses those of us that are dealing with this product day in and day out. Prism Ultimate, in what you're talking about here, is specifically for Prism Central, right? So Prism Central has historically had Starter and Pro, and you know, Pro provided the runway, the capacity runway, and a little bit deeper dive into your cluster and cluster management. Ultimate is now the 3rd tier on Prism Central. You still have the standard Prism Starter, Prism Pro, Prism Ultimate on the AOS side, but now what we're talking about here specifically for SQL Server monitoring, application discovery is Prism Central specific functionality for licensing.
Awesome. Yeah. And Prism Central, I think the main benefit there, right, is if you're looking at Nutanix and you've got multiple locations, you've got really kind of that zoomed out perspective of the environment across multiple sites. Central is where a lot of our customers have found value because of that visibility. So that's definitely.
You know, honestly, we see it even with a single cluster, right? If it's a single cluster and you've got kind of dynamic growth, the capacity runway for Prism Central really lets you see, hey, and I just went through this exercise with a customer a couple of weeks ago. Hey, I'm about to drop a handful of workloads into this cluster. I need to see what this is going to ultimately do for me from a utilization perspective. So they were able to use Prism Central in the capacity runway to say, if they added all these workloads they were expecting, they're going to run out of RAM in about 6 weeks, right? So they kind of understood that, hey, I need to step back and maybe think about either expanding my nodes or increasing memory or doing something different with this application stack, and they were able to successfully do that. So again, that's really where the value there is Prism Central, even if it's a single cluster.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's good to know. That's I think the whole software suite, right, is really something to dig into. So we'll touch on that more if it pops up in the questions. Final piece here for those of you that are kind of taking a look at Kubernetes and the Geek tool in particular, right? Nutanix, and this is really just kind of a testament to the versatility of the solution. You're now able to run Anthos on Nutanix. So again, kind of that multi-cloud story. If your organization is at the level where everything's on the table, and how can we integrate that with what we're doing today, I think Nutanix is continuing to build a pretty robust portfolio there in terms of their third-party integrations, if you will. So that's the Nutanix news at 9, if you will. And
let's add one more just for fun. Let's add one more Nutanix clusters, right?
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news. We'll not call it breaking news. It's still kind of unreleased news, I guess we can call it. You know, Nutanix clusters right now is that bare metal Nutanix solution in AWS. We're still tracking for Nutanix clusters on Azure sometime in calendar year 2021, right? So we're probably looking later this year, but that allows you that bare metal workloads within the public cloud, both AWS and Azure, giving you that kind of seamless migration. I think we've got maybe a topic on this coming up later in our track record here, but you know, that's I think keeping an eye on for especially the Microsoft customers. The Azure side of clusters is going to be kind of a great win for being able to utilize the public cloud, but keep that Nutanix simplicity between on-prem and the cloud.
Yeah, no, that's a good call on clusters. I think kind of that seamless experience, right, has been touted in the past, but now really being able to have that same layer across your different environments. I mean, that's a game changer. So I'm definitely excited there.
Yeah, I've had more conversations over the last probably month about clusters than I have in probably the past 6 months of interest before that. So I think it's starting to gain some traction.
Yeah. And I would say if you're having trouble searching Nutanix clusters on the internet, it's probably a poor naming convention right now because they also have clusters on premise. So if we can help clear up any questions, just let us know there. But definitely a good point.
No, Nutanix, the name will change in a couple months.
Yeah. I love it though. Great. So yeah, I think really now we can kind of get into the meat of this. We had a few comments and questions submitted and pulled a few from some of our customer interactions, but looking forward to getting your feedback on these, Mike. And I'll go ahead and get us kicked off. I think for this first submission, appreciate this one. I believe you know, this relates kind of to a common question that a lot of Nutanix users have, right? So this question, it sounds like, and we'll dig into this in more detail, but it sounds like maybe this organization has purchased Nutanix on Dell equipment and they're running VMware today, And as I understand it, they're interested in maybe doing a refresh and moving on to the Nutanix hypervisor as well as the super micro platform. So what they call the NX platform for Nutanix. Talk to us a little bit about that move from not just the hardware perspective, but also VMware to Acropolis hypervisor, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one thing I think Nutanix does really well across hypervisors is gives you the ability for some level of we'll call it seamless migration, right? It's not truly seamless in the sense that I can just pick a VM up and move it around wherever I need it to go. But for customers that are looking at moving from say Dell hardware, and that's whether it's a Nutanix cluster or a 3-tier cluster or another hyperconverged solution running on Dell hardware and VMware, and they're going towards AHV, Nutanix has a specific tool called Move. Its goal or its sole purpose, let's re-say, is to provide a simple migration path from VMware, from Hyper-V, from AWS, and roadmap for Azure into the AHV ecosystem. So into a cluster running AHV, regardless of what hardware vendor that is, right? In this specific question, we're Supermicro hardware and AHV. You can insert any other platform that Nutanix supports for AHV there, but Move is specifically used for helping you migrate, both migrate the VMs and planning a migration from a VMware or Hyper-V or the other public clouds into an AHV system. So that allows me to basically say, here's all the VMs I want to move from one or more sources, doesn't matter what that source is, into an AHV cluster, and from the push of a button, kick off a migration of that data and basically seed it in, and then at another push of a button, power those VMs off on the source, power them up into AHV. It does the automatic conversion from, and if you're a VMware host, it's going to convert the VMDKs over to the AHV KVM format of disks and power that VM on. So it's very seamless. I think one customer I did this with, we were moving from a HPE hardware in VMware into a Supermicro and AHV environment. And I believe we did about 300 VMs in a weekend with the Move tool, right? So it was very easy. The customer started it, they picked their migration plan, and then we just started going through and migrating the VMs over. So one thing there, right, is it's a very simple process. Nutanix provides this tool free of charge. I mean, you've already bought Nutanix, so you own Move, right? So moving into the AHV ecosystem is very easy. Move is also a tool that we see being used for, a 3-tier VMware solution into a Nutanix VMware solution, right? Okay. It's not always easy to just. Somebody would say, hey, it's VMware. I can just pick my VMs up and move them from VMware to VMware, no problem. And in general, that is the case, but we've got to worry about, network capacity, network utilization, age of hardware, things like that. Move basically allows us to systematically migrate our VMs. And again, a lot of other features and functionality there that Move provides. So that's a very simple way to get into AHV. That's not the only way to do it as well, right? There are other more manual ways that we can basically take the VMware VM, import it into AHV, and then spin a VM up from there. But that's the beauty of Nutanix here, again, is the simplicity of the platform, is the extension of the tools that continue to make the platform simple. So that migration is very easy.
Okay. So it sounds like, I mean, that's included with Nutanix, right? So if this group's already a Nutanix customer, maybe, hey, let's spend some time learning more about the Move tool, maybe walk through a few, right? We do that a lot at eGroup is really more, hey, we're going to teach you how to fish, and let's do the first 5 VMs with you. And then at that point, you should have more than enough information to tackle the next 20, 50, 100, right?
Exactly right. And a great scenario with the Move tool. I was working with another customer a couple weeks ago, and they had a newly deployed AHV cluster. They had I don't even know what the hardware vendor was, but it was a VMware cluster with vCenter. And then they had 3 additional legacy hosts that were not in vCenter. They were older versions of VMware, and they wanted to be able to get their VMs out of those hosts as well. And we were able to use Move to not only migrate 100% of their VMs out of their vCenter cluster, but they were able to target move to those single hosts as well that they had that were legacy, and they didn't know how they were going to get stuff off of them. And they were able to migrate that into AHV, into their new cluster. So, those hosts didn't have a storage array. They were just basically single hosts, local storage. We were able to migrate all of those VMs into AHV with one tool. And this was a guy that had just been using AHV for 2 weeks, right? So he was able to, easily pick this up and do that migration himself.
Yeah, I will say it seems like a lot of the tools are easier to pick up, and sometimes switching to Nutanix is more of a comfort issue than it is like an actual technical competency issue.
Definitely. Biggest runway I see with customers is going from VMware to AHV is just having to relearn a little bit of AHV, right? I'm so ingrained and so used to the VMware buttons and where I go to do things. AHV is very similar, but it presents a different way of doing things, right? So if you've used VMware, you're 90% of the way there on AHV. It's just learning the nuances of where do I go to do these extra little things. That's been the biggest challenge I see with AHV is just having to kind of relearn that muscle memory of where you go to do things.
Yeah, that and a new vocabulary, right? With your prisms and your moves and all that. So we could certainly help on the vocab side too if you have questions on the features there. But no, so Nutanix Move sounds like a pretty good tool for kind of that AHV to VMware migration. That kind of relates to the second comment or question, if you will, that we received. So and we see this a lot. I think is, hey, I've got 3-tier. What's the point of going to hyperconverged? I mean, I don't really deal with my SAN much. The support's good. I'd like that they mentioned Nimble, because I remember Nimble. I mean, that Anthos site tool that I believe they still have. I mean, that really kind of set the standard for support in a lot of ways. So I know a lot of groups bought Nimble storage probably 4 to 7 years ago, paired up with some HPE or Cisco servers, and they're probably sitting at that point right now where we're coming up on year 5. What's all this buzz about hyperconverged? So for this one, I guess, for maybe Nimble in particular, if you can get into it, what specific things should an organization running 3-tier look for in Nutanix, knowing that there's all sorts of other Nutanix products out there? Where should they kind of hone in on out of the gate?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and everybody kind of has to look back inward as to why they want to stay 3-tier as well, right? I think it's just kind of flipping that question is, instead of why go hyperconverged, why stay 3-tier? Now, and I'll be the first to admit, there are use cases still for 3-tier. There's a need for that 3-tier type of environment still, but it's not for everybody, right? So when I look at this question and have this conversation with customers, some of it turns around, we can get into the financial play, right? Well, that's great. You've got Nimble, and unless you're doing their capacity plan where, you're only paying for what you're using, and they kind of have that evergreen refresh cycle for you as long as you keep paying your bill. At the same time, you're having to refresh your servers. And a lot, let's be honest, how many people or how many customers really have their server support and their storage support co-term to the exact same date so that they're always refreshing everything at one time, right? That happens, but it's not everybody. But what if you could turn this around, and this kind of goes to the hyperconverged response, is what if you could turn this around and say, you're going to buy hyperconverged once. You're never going to rebuy the whole thing again, right? And this is from the financial side is, if I spend $100,000 buying my Nutanix cluster now, in 3 or 5 or 7 years, whatever my refresh cycle is, I'm never going to have to spend that $100,000 to buy that Nutanix cluster over again. In year 3 or year 4, I can buy that one. I can budget for one node and refresh one node out of my cluster, and I can have a very systematic budget process that allows me to refresh one at a time as I need to, and continue to cycle through these nodes over time. Again, Nutanix allows us to go from, have a G5, a G6, and a G7 node in the same cluster, right? So hardware generation independent, I can continue to grow my cluster. So that's the financial side, right? It's having a little bit better control over budgetary cycles and understanding what my costs are going to be as I go through time. Financial one is kind of an easy way to look at that, right? It's
Mhm.
it's ones and zeros, it's dollars and cents, right? We can look and see why hyperconverged makes sense. No pun intended there. From a technology perspective, right? I've got to have the ability to understand how to support my nimble SAN or how to support my insert storage array here, right? I've got to now also manage my physical footprint of my servers. I've got to manage the hypervisor, right? I've got 3 or 4, 5, 6 different touch points of management I've got to make, and I've got to kind of go through and patch and make sure they're all from a complexity perspective, all my patching are within compatibility of others, right? Living in some of the worlds where if I patch my host to a certain level, does my storage array support that? If I patch my storage array, do I now have to turn around and patch my host? And you kind of get into this crosswalk of a compatibility matrix that can sometimes be a little complex, right?
Mhm.
So with hyperconverged, now I've got this one button to push and I can upgrade my entire stack. I'm not having to look at what is my storage performance versus my compute performance. I can scale both of those independently, and I think we have that question yet. So I was jumping ahead to the very next question actually in my response and didn't realize it. I can scale independently storage, compute, and so forth to make sure that my environment is always staying in check with what I'm looking for. So I think the simplicity of a single platform, single pane of glass for compute, VMs, storage, networking to some extent, all is a driving factor for customers of why the 3-tier architecture, while it still has its place, is starting to the hyperconverged world is starting to benefit from that simplicity approach. And Nutanix is kind of driving that one again with AHV, where I can see all my VMs, I can see my physical servers, I can see my storage, and I can also patch all of that within a single pane of glass, non-user disruptive, in a very simple way. I mean, you can see videos of guys from Nutanix or customers in Nutanix patching their Nutanix clusters while he's on an airplane flying from Europe over to the US to attend a Nutanix conference, right? So he's 30,000 feet in the air patching his cluster without worries, right? So again, knowing that the hyperconverged kind of market is getting stronger by the day, by the week, by the year, I really think it's today's question is why not hyperconverged versus why hyperconverged, and again, it's simplicity that drives that to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you and I deal with that a lot, right? So, for us, it makes a lot of sense, and I think where we've been able to kind of help guide our customers and people interested in the technology is really just kind of digging into not necessarily the speeds and feeds anymore these days, but how much time are you spending with your infrastructure? Again, I think it's not that this new technology is something that is an uphill battle. It's more just do we kind of shake up our comfort level, and do we drop some old habits so we can focus on new habits? And I think what we've been able to see is teams do get a better focus, at least on stuff that might be more relevant to the day-to-day mission.
Yeah, and one topic I think on the hyperconverged area is around what Nutanix does with volumes, right? And having the ability to, I've had this argument from customers several times. Well, I want to go hyperconverged, but I've got these Oracle servers, or I've got these extra servers that I've got. I can't make them VMs, right? So they have to stay physical servers for whatever reason. But I've got to have extra, I don't want to have to load them up with storage locally. I need to have, that's what my storage array is for, right? These servers connect to my storage array and get their storage from there. Oracle, SQL, things like that. With Nutanix and specifically being able to extend their platform not just to the local VMs, but the ability to take volumes from that Nutanix cluster, from my ample storage space that I've got, and present that out to an Oracle physical server, right? Again, that helps me get into that hyperconverged world with Nutanix, simplify my platform, but still providing the capabilities for systems that don't have the ability to go to a hyperconverged or VM kind of route. I can think of a handful of customers that we've done specifically this for Oracle, right? They couldn't get rid of their physical Oracle server, but we use the Nutanix volumes capability within our cluster to provide that storage back. Again, I'm able to simplify my environment, simplify my footprint, but still provide the features and functionality that some of my extras, my outside systems still need. And I think that's a big win there as well.
No, that makes sense. And looking at the questions, I think we hit on a few of these with kind of the response there. So maybe to extend on this, and I do just on the time front, I will stop at 9:28 just to give everybody a quick overview on Leanne from our team, who's going to reach out for some feedback, but we'll certainly stay on after that. But do want to be respectful of the 30-minute time we got you all hooked up for. So we'll pause there for a moment. But before we do that, in terms of, and we kind of touched on the team of generalists, right? Like, you don't have to be a specific skill set necessarily with Nutanix. A question from me, I guess, is, have you seen in your time with Nutanix, the customers that maybe adopted Nutanix 6 years ago versus the customers that adopted it 2 years ago? Are you seeing any kind of major differences between the two organizations and in terms of how long ago they adopted Nutanix?
I think the ones that adopted Nutanix early on, I'd say kind of it's two phase there. One is they were already mature enough with their IT staff that they understood that going hyperconverged. Again, and I'll kind of step back on this. I worked for an organization that we had a storage team, right? And you can probably mirror this from several organizations. We had a storage team that did nothing but storage. We had a backup team that did nothing but backup. We had an Intel team that did nothing but Windows servers. A Unix team that did nothing but Unix servers, and we were very compartmentalized, right? And you didn't cross over, right? You never stepped foot into somebody else's territory, because that was fighting. So I'd say that the organizations that were attracted to Nutanix early on, that had more of a generalist approach, they were probably more mature as an IT organization at the time, right? And so what we're seeing now, I think, is people realizing that the ways of having these distinct teams are those silos, it's not necessarily the best either for morale or for growth of your employees, right? If you've got an employee that is a backup guy today that wants to get into storage, right? He's got to kind of leave what he was doing behind. I think this allows people to grow. From my perspective, I think as on this side of the fence as well, focusing in on Nutanix, it's allowed me to grow more and go wider with a lot of different technologies rather than having to focus on one thing because it is so complex, right? Nutanix makes a lot of things simple that we've been able to kind of grow our own staff to go wide. And I think organizations see that by the adoption of hyperconverged and Nutanix specifically, of being able to kind of grow their employees into other areas where, maybe it's security, maybe it's something else within the organization or within the IT group that needs help that they're able to now do that they weren't able to do before.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's I know from the sales side, I enjoy it more because it's less work. I know that's a terrible thing to say, but it's for my customers, right? There's less back and forth. There's less sizing conversations. It's more driven by the data and the tools. And with certain groups, it's as simple as like, hey, I need another Houston site, or we've got kind of like stamps for different functions within the organization, and it's like I need 3 warehouses and a retail center, and that's how we can talk about technology. So I think simple is preferred, and for me on the sales side, I see that in the sense of even the procurement process has greatly hastened. So I'm going to use this time to real quick, for those of you that do need to drop at 9:30, I did just want to call out briefly on the slide here, once it moves for me. We will be reaching out, Leanne in particular, so I say look out for Leanne. She's with our business development group here. Really, as this is our first Nutanix at 9 session, we're interested in getting your feedback. We're definitely interested in hearing what topics you want to see on the horizon. If you are actively interested in taking a look at infrastructure and what eGroup might be able to do to assist, please feel free to jump on our website. If you go to what we do, you'll see data center optimization on there. I highlighted the contact us form there. That should be what you see there. But again, like I said, Leanne's going to be reaching out to those of you that were able to join us today just for some feedback and also to follow up with this info. So if there's nothing else on that side and anybody would like to stay, Mike, are you good to maybe run through 1 or 2 more questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm good.
Awesome. So let me pop back in here. But again, just please look out for Leanne's outreach, and we again would really welcome the feedback and kind of guidance for where you'd like to see this to go. So hopping back into the questions here. I think, you know, from this perspective, I think we've touched on a lot of this. So I don't know if there's anything across these questions, Mike, that maybe you felt we could dive into a little bit more.
Let's do the storage, and can I mix and match storage and compute?
That's a good one.
I think this is a fairly unique one with Nutanix. I touched on the fact that you can have different generations of hardware, right? So you can have, Nutanix runs their hardware by generation. So G5, G6, G7. Our current generation of hardware is G7, and of course within the G7s, we've got various types of various node types, right? A 1000 series. Is a nice mix of compute and storage. The 3000 series is a little bit heavier. The 8000 series is a little bit heavier, right? So as we look at these, depending when you're walking into a Nutanix solution, depending on what the customer needs, what the scoping and sizing needs, right? A lot of times, I might be able to start with a 1000 series cluster. But as I grow, maybe I need more compute, maybe I need more storage, right? So not only does Nutanix allow you to mix and match node generations in a single cluster, they also allow you to mix and match storage and compute types within a single cluster. So kind of take this scenario, for example, is I can have, I jump in my first Nutanix cluster. It's for migration of all my 3-tier VMs. I've got 100 VMs, let's just say is a nice round number. I go with a 4-node Nutanix cluster, a 1065 or 1465 would be the specific one. So I've been running on that for years. It's great. Then all of a sudden, I'm getting ready to import or deploy a document imaging solution, right? And all of a sudden, my storage growth is gonna skyrocket. And I don't want to have to buy additional storage or another storage array or something like that. But I also know that in my current Nutanix solution, I'm fine on compute, but I don't have the storage to accommodate this right now, and I don't want to have to refresh all my nodes just to make this happen. So in that specific scenario, what I can do is I can keep my existing cluster and buy, say, 2 storage nodes. And the storage nodes would be light on compute footprint, light, smaller CPU, smaller memory, but very disk heavy, right? Up to, I think, 24 disks we can get into these storage nodes. And so I add 2 storage nodes to this cluster and I grow from 4 nodes to 6 nodes. And now all of a sudden what I've done is I've extended my single cluster that provides me single pane of glass management to now be able to deploy this document imaging solution and provide the necessary storage I need, but staying within that Nutanix cluster, right? I'm not having to manage another cluster or another piece of hardware or something else outside my ecosystem of Nutanix. So really that's a scenario that we see in a lot where I need more storage growth, but I don't want to have to buy more compute and RAM that are just going to sit there and probably go unused for the most part. So that's one way to look at it. The other side is the flip side. Is say I've got plenty of storage, but I need compute or RAM, right? I can now add more nodes that are lighter on storage, but bump up my CPU and RAM and provide me more compute. So all staying within the same cluster across generations of hardware. So I've got that freedom of scaling north and south, right? Of compute storage RAM as I need to. I can go east to west based on generations of hardware or what I need from a footprint. So it allows the customer the ability to really kind of pick and choose how they grow their environment, right? What's my blast radius going to be? Do I scale my compute and RAM up? Do I add more RAM? Do I add a node? Do I add storage? Do I compute? A lot of different kind of permutations we can walk through, but it really provides still that single pane of glass environment for Nutanix. Very simple. So
yeah,
I think that's a huge benefit there.
Yeah, I think that's a big one to focus on, because maybe a few years ago, right, there was a lot out there. Oh, you have to have a certain amount of compute, have to have a certain amount of storage, and Nutanix, I think, was knocked for that. But the services that they can offer and the integrations that they offer now, I mean, those have evolved quite a bit. And they used Legos a lot in their marketing, right? Like you're just kind of picking different bricks, but they've all kind of got that same connector. It's very much that approach still as they broaden the portfolio. So I think, if you're taking a look at Nutanix and you can't do storage nodes or you can't do heavy compute, right? Like there are limitations within that, but day after day, it's becoming easier to continue to kind of develop a wider array of essentially bolt-ons for what your environment is.
Yeah, and I think my favorite thing Nutanix did was around the storage only nodes, right? Is years ago we had a 5000 series that was basically coined as the storage only node, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And over time, we've now gone to the fact that any node can be a storage only node. So it doesn't matter if it's a 1000 series that has 3 disks per node, up to an 8000 series that I might be able to get 24 disks per node. I can pick and choose the node that matches what I need most instead of having to buy, a lot of extra hardware that maybe I'm going to move into, right? I can very systematically pick and choose what nodes I want for compute, what nodes I want for storage, since any node can be a compute or any node can be a storage only node, right? So I think that being able to have that flexibility, I think really helps set Nutanix apart from that flexibility of choice from the platform.
Yeah, makes sense. And I got a question here that asks, can you mix different types of hardware? And I know that's kind of where you don't want to go on the Nutanix side, right? Like as far as mixing and matching nodes, like a cluster is defined as kind of what all the hardware software that you're managing. You can have multiple clusters, one on Dell, one on Supermicro, one on HPE, but the actual cluster needs to be the same hardware. So,
exactly right. And we say in that regard, right? Again, you have freedom of choice for storage nodes, for compute nodes. In a single cluster, they must be one vendor, right? So that's the defining control factor there is if I'm a Dell, if I'm running Nutanix on Dell today and I need to add one more node, I can't get a Supermicro node to add to that cluster or an HPE node, right? I'm bound by the hardware vendor that I'm working with. So now it doesn't keep you from saying, I've got a Dell cluster today and say I need a DMZ cluster that I want to keep separate. I don't have to keep that on Dell. I can run that through a Supermicro or an HPE or Lenovo, or again, insert any of the OEM vendors that Nutanix has. But it's that single that cluster basically is our boundary for hardware vendor specific clusters.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that Nutanix is a software solution, right? And the hardware is kind of like debating over what kind of tires you're throwing on your car. Yeah, some use cases you need summer slicks, but for the most part, all weather, all season. That's who cares?
Honestly, down here in South Carolina, right? If you're a state agency, Lenovo holds the state contract for Nutanix, right? So if you're a South Carolina state agency and you buy off state contract, well, and you want to go Nutanix, you're going Lenovo, right? And again, some people will say, well, I don't want Lenovo, but again, that's the beauty of Nutanix. It's going to run on any hardware platform. So we're not throwing a piece of hardware in there that's second rate or that we know is going to have issues. It's been validated, vetted, and confirmed by both Nutanix and the OEM vendor. So again, we might do a Lenovo this week, an HPE next week, a Dell next week, a Supermicro next week. I mean, and the ever-growing OEM category for Nutanix continues to grow. I mean, servers that I've never even seen in the wild, Intel, Class. So, Class, I think, is the one that's the hardened military approach for, some of the Nutanix. So again, it's a wide array of hardware platforms, but it's still the same software, right? If I look at a Nutanix cluster running on HPE, a Nutanix cluster running on NX or the Supermicro brand, or a Nutanix cluster running on Dell, the only way I know it's any different from Prism, for example, is looking in and says, this is an HPE node, this is a Dell node, this is a Supermicro or an NX node. The software, the look, the feel, the touch, and everything that you do with it is still the exact same.
Yeah, it's kind of like cloud, right? You don't pick your hypervisor, you just kind of carve it out and you're off to the races. So
exactly right. Don't care.
Yeah, you kind of get that cloud experience without the concern of cloud budget and making sure you're on top of that. But
absolutely.
100%. And I would say for those of you that haven't started looking at Nutanix or are potentially considering it, right, do your best to approach it from a software, mindset. Go in and look at Nutanix as the software. Don't necessarily get tied up with a hardware vendor, out of the gate. You want to make sure that you fully understand the functionality of that software and how that might impact your data center and cloud operations. And then at the end, right, that's typically when it's, all right, well, what do you want this on? Do you have a preference, right? Is the rest of your equipment aligned with a certain vendor and you want to keep it easy? But Nutanix as a software evaluation, I think, is important. And they've also got something to mention, Mike, on the different groups is they've got that support part figured out too.
Yes.
So when it comes to, do I have to call Dell for support or do I call Nutanix when I'm running the two? You used to have to call Dell, but Nutanix has kind of understood the importance of that support experience and made sure that with all these different hardware providers, they've got that's pretty much the same, I would say, across the board, especially if they're calling Nutanix direct, that same support experience that they're known for.
Absolutely, right. I mean, and that's, I love Nutanix support. I love it. There's a handful of vendors out there that when we sell that vendor's product, I want the customer to experience support. I want them to go and actually experience that support, that engagement, right? So, very small handful of vendors that I truly believe their support organization is what also makes their product better, right? I don't call in and I have to jump through 4 or 5 people to get to somebody that's going to help me solve my problem. Nutanix is one of those that when I call Nutanix, when I have the customer call Nutanix, their support organization, it's second to none, right? And again, it makes the experience of the overall platform that much better, right? I wish
hey, guys,
more vendors.
Jumping in here real quick, we got a new question. I don't know if you guys saw that pop in. Yep. It says, we are now Dell with VMware hypervisors. Can you add a new cluster for the new node?
All right, I'm going to take a stab at kind of thinking I understand where they're going with this. So if you're currently a Dell customer, and I'm just going to say if you're Dell running with Nutanix and VMware, and you want to add a node, you're adding a node, you can logically separate Nutanix nodes, so Nutanix on Dell with VMware into say I've got 4 nodes, or let's use 5 because I like that number better. Say I have 4 and I add a 5th node. I could logically separate 3 of those nodes into one VMware cluster and 2 of those nodes into let's call it a management DMZ cluster. It's still a single Nutanix cluster under the hood. It's still a 5-node Nutanix cluster, but at the VMware level, I've logically separated at the cluster level in VMware cluster terms, those into a 3-node cluster and a 2-node cluster. So I'm not sure if that's exactly where the question was going. At least that's my interpretation on it. But as long as you're Dell and Nutanix, again, you're bound to always buy a Dell node to add to that cluster. But at the VMware level, I can separate logically my nodes into different clusters.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and I would say that's the question we could probably dig into, 10, 15 minutes in a little more detail offline, just to kind of run through that. But to your point, if you're expanding a cluster, it's going to have to be Dell. But if you're thinking about actually replacing that cluster, you have that option. But again, if it's going to be a piece of that existing cluster, you're going to have that hardware requirement there. So
exactly.
Definitely a scenario we run into all the time, and I think if we were to kind of dig into the details a bit more on the specifics, pretty straightforward answer there. So
yeah, the VMware, the answer I gave for VMware is true. Logically, I can separate clusters. AHV does not have the cluster construct. So in AHV, I've got it's one cluster, and I can't logically separate nodes into different clusters like I can with VMware. But my answer, so we asked about adding a new cluster. We can increment. Yeah, absolutely. So you could stand, if the question that just popped in, you could stand up a Nutanix Supermicro Nutanix cluster, and that would, you could, a lot of times what we do in this case is I'll add that new cluster of Nutanix Supermicro into the same vCenter, right? So I might have one cluster that it could be Dell 3-tier, it could be Dell Nutanix, and I've got another cluster that's Nutanix on Supermicro, but all under a single vCenter entity as a separate cluster, right? We'll do that for, if we're staying on the VMware hypervisor, we'll do that for things like, VM migrations, things like that, so I can easily vMotion between clusters. Again, that's as long as, again, I think to this answer, yeah, you can have a separate cluster specifically for that Nutanix Supermicro hardware.
Awesome. Yeah, again, appreciate the question. I think that if there's anything outstanding on that, we'd be happy to dive into it. I think checking the list of what we've got here and then what has been submitted, wanted to leave it out there for anybody that might have any last minute questions, but again, appreciate the audience and what you've submitted for today and what we were able to kind of run through. Definitely appreciated. Oh, this wouldn't work to migrate off VMware. Do we want to touch on that real quick, just in terms of the actual VMware piece? Yeah. So thank you, Michael.
And Michael, I'm gonna ask you a question. Hopefully, you can respond to it in the question chat, the Q&A. Would this be so? Your Nutanix Supermicro, would that be an AHV cluster? If it is, then we'd use the move tool to specifically migrate VMs out of that VMware cluster to AHV. And I'm happy to kind of talk offline after this if that helps kind of to explain a little bit further, so we can actually dig deeper into the question.
Yeah, because I guess we've seen, right, you get Dell, you've got Supermicro, you move the VMware environment over like you were doing VMware migration, and then you can convert with move. Yep. Or that process can happen in transit, correct?
Yep. Okay. So one of the things Nutanix also provides, and I never recommend this for production. It's possible if I'm a Nutanix customer on regardless of hardware on VMware, they do an in-flight conversion over to AHV as well. I'd never like to do that for a production environment, but it is possible as well out there. So.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I appreciate the questions here at the end. And if we haven't gotten to that answer in full detail, like I said, Leanne's going to be shooting out notes after the fact. She'll be able to connect you to the right resources, Mike and myself, or some of the other team here. But I think with that being said, if there's nothing else, let me do a quick check on the checkbox.
Questions. But Dan, I appreciate it. This was fun. Let's looking forward to more of these.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see, Michael, I just saw your final note there. We'll get back to that in more detail, shoot you a note and kind of dig into this. But yeah, appreciate everybody taking the time. I know it's a morning webinar, but this is the first of our many Nutanix at 9 sessions to follow, and just appreciate everybody for coming out.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.